So welcome back to the Grievance Manager tutorial series. And we're now on to the verbal step in the continuing saga of our grievant Joe Smith and his attempt to get paid for the 2 hours that he did not get paid from his field trip. So in the previous video, the previous step, we were at the investigation phase and we filled in all of our information from there. So the next step in this process, we're now going to move through the actual steps of the grievance procedure. Now, depending on which contract that you're working from which carrier, this may be slightly different. Since we're working off the American Airlines contract for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to start with the verbal step. Now, the verbal step in this situation is simply documentation as far as grievance manager goes. When you're actually doing the grievance procedure, just like the step sounds, verbal, you will be verbally dealing with a supervisor, a member of management, where you will be discussing the grievance, discussing the issue, and attempting to get it resolved verbally without putting pen to paper, as we used to say. But for the purposes of grievance manager, this is documenting what you said to management, what was said, what was any investigation that you did, any decisions that management came to. So when we're on the verbal screen, you'll notice again that everything starts with this status box here. This grievance is open. We can tab through here, the date filed 4/14/23. This is when we first started this grievance. We're going to leave it here. So now we're going to go over here to file document. In this case, this would be if you had, say, verbal paperwork. I know the American team had paperwork to document verbals, and if you wanted to, you could browse. You could click this button, browse your computer. You could find something that you wanted to upload, maybe documentation here, or you can just leave that blank. Filed by union representative. So let's say we're going to keep with the same. We're going to say our shop steward is filing this. His name is Robert Howell. Filed to. If you remember, the first supervisor that he spoke to was William Johnson, so we're going to keep him in the loop here. The date of his meeting, we're going to say it was on the 14th, same as the date that the filed. The meeting document, again, this is if you had any sort of documentation, any sort of paperwork, you wrote anything down documenting what you did on the verbal step, you could upload it here. Union representative. This is one of those things where sometimes you may see some redundancy here, and that's just fine. Robert Howell filed this. So we're going to say Robert Howell is the union representative. Company representative, again, a little bit redundant, but that's fine. We're going to put William Johnson. Company's decision, we're going to say it was unsatisfactory. We didn't like what they had to say. So the date of the decision was the 14th, same day we filed. Decision document, same as the meeting document and file document. If the supervisor wrote anything down and handed it to you while you were going over the verbal step with him, you might want to make a copy and you might want to upload it here. Received by, I'm just going to stay with Robert Howell. Signed by Johnson. Union notes. This is where you would want to put in exactly what happened. So we're going to say met with supervisor William Johnson. He did not want to take the time to discuss pay issue with us. Attendees are Hal, William Johnson, and we're going to say the grievant Joe Smith was there as well. The company response was, we don't take care of pay issues here in the supervisor's office. You need to take this up with payroll. So now you would save. Here you see the save and delete. Make sure you hit save. Now we've saved the verbal step. As we move to the next step, over to the top, hit next step. Now you have a drop down box here. So now we would pick step 1. We're already through verbal. And now we're going to move through exactly the same as we did. If you'll notice, this screen is exactly the same. Date filed, date of meeting, filed documents. And you're going to move through these exactly the same as you did under verbal. Only difference you may see here is meeting level. Again, this is going to be station. You're not the GRB yet, you're not arbitration. We're going to move through this fairly quickly. Step 1, we're going to say that it was say a few days later. We're going to say it was the 17th. We're not going to upload any documents here. It's a station level. We're going to keep this the same. And I'm going to go back again on date file was actually the 14th, so I'm going to correct that. Representative. Company's decision, again, unsatisfactory. You'll see why in a minute. And the date of the decision was on the 17th. And again, if you had documents, any kind of documentation that you want to file here, again, you browse your computer, you upload these. Now let's come over here to Union Notes. Now in this case, we're going to say file first step grievance. Company supervisor, William Johnson. Supervisor continued in the same track as the verbal response. Doesn't want to deal with the issue. And for attendees for step 1, we're going to say that it was simply Robert Howe and William Johnson. In this case, Joe Smith didn't come along as you took care of the step 1. Company response. This is above my head. My manager or someone payroll need to deal with this pay issue. I don't have time for this. And we're going to hit save. Now you see the verbal in step 1 now both been saved and they're up here at the top of the toolbar. So let's go to the next step. Again, you look at this screen, everything stayed the same. We now get to pull over to our next step, step 2. Now, step 2 now is depending again on the contract and depending on the carrier. If we're dealing with American, now it is step 2 now, the local committee has gotten involved. So we're going to come back in the next video and we're going to see how the committee deals with this ongoing grievance.